Measure B to approve the massive Lilac Hills development gets a curious financial contribution. These downtown apartments had hundreds of code violations, including sewage backups and gas leaks. They're in good shape now, but where will the old tenants go? Thousands of Haitian refugees in San Diego were due to be deported. Did Hurricane Matthew change all that? I'm Kenny Goldberg, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Kenny Goldberg, sitting in for Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Joe Urardi of KPBS News Partner iNewsSource. Hi, Joe.
No place I'd rather be, Kenny.
All right. Megan Burks, education reporter for KPBS News. Hi, Megan.
Hi, Kenny.
And Jean Guerrero, Fronteras reporter for KPBS News. Hi, Jean.
Hi, Kenny.
Welcome to everybody. Lilac Hills, it's the pastoral name for a massive development in rural Valley Center. 1,700 homes, office and retail space, all spread over 600 acres. The project is on the November ballot as Measure B. Opponents say Measure B violates San Diego County's recently adopted general plan, which calls for just 100 new homes on that parcel. The county's Republican Party recently endorsed Measure B. 9 days later, the developer of the project gave the party $50,000. Joe, what's wrong with this picture?
Well, it really depends on what your perspective is, right, where you're standing. To the Republican Party chairman, to the developer, Creative Investments, they say there's nothing wrong with this. The party made their endorsement based on the merits of Measure B. And 9 days later, the Creative wanted to give a contribution for a couple different things, to host a fundraiser, and then also to get on the party's voter guide now that they'd been endorsed. Of course, to the opponents of Measure B, it's something else entirely. They say it stinks, basically, and people have told me they feel that the Republican Party essentially sold their endorsement.
Now, even if they had sold their endorsement and admitted it, is there anything wrong with that?
No. There's, I guess it would kind of be like Christmas in Japan, right? There's nothing wrong with it, but it would be rather unusual, right?
And what are they saying about it? What's their rationale for this timing?
This is you're talking about the Republican Party, what they told me?
Right.
Sure. Well, I spoke with Tony Kravarik. He's the chairman of the county GOP, and I asked about this timing, and he said, well, here's what happened. We voted on September 12th to endorse it for good reason. We thought it was a good measure. And then after that, Accretive came to us, and they were interested in sponsoring one of our fundraisers, one of 2 annual fundraisers they do every year that they have a lot of corporate sponsors for. Accretive was interested in being one of those sponsors. That was $10,000. And then the rest of the money went to the Republican Party for Accretive to get their Measure B endorsement onto the Republican Party's voter guide. That's how they do the voter guide. The Republican Party will endorse candidates or measures, and then those candidates or measures have the opportunity to pay for inclusion on this mailer.
Why is this endorsement important?
So for some of the real high-profile measures or candidates that attract a lot of media attention, most people have heard about them. They already have their ideas on how they're going to vote kind of in their head, right? But let's say you're a Republican who lives in Chula Vista or El Cajon, somewhere very far away from North County, very far away from Lilac Hills Ranch where it would go. You probably don't know a whole lot about it. Maybe you've never heard about it at all. But if you see that, oh, I'm a Republican and the Republican Party who I trust is endorsing this measure and telling me to vote for it, in the absence of any other evidence, I feel confident voting for it.
Now, this measure allows the developer to violate the county's general plan that the county spent millions of dollars on and years of planning to put out. And it allows the developer to, in essence, go around that whole plan and just put it before the voters. How can they get away with that?
Well, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people take issue with the term kind of get away with that, but the fact is the law does allow developers to take issues directly to the voters. We have the proposition in California, it's been a part of state law for I think a century now. If you want to put a question directly to the voters, you can do that, and building housing development is really no different.
Well, let me ask the whole group. I mean, why do we have a county planning process if a well-heeled developer or somebody else who has a lot of money can just get around it? Is that right?
I don't know if it's for me to say. I mean, I know that in the neighborhood I live in, I'd want to be able to have a say. And ideally, I think that say is supposed to happen throughout the process, but maybe people don't feel like they can get to those meetings and have a say.
I don't know. Well, here's what James Gordon, a Valley Center resident who's against the project, said about why the developer chose to go to the voters.
They could have avoided all this money and just gone to the Board of Supervisors, but they didn't because they couldn't. They couldn't because the project wouldn't be approved, and if it was approved, it would be approved with too many conditions. So what do? It was cheaper to spend a couple million to throw it on the ballot because they could, sham the voters and a sweetheart deal for the developer.
What's the developers say about that point of view, Joe?
The idea that they couldn't get it through kind of the regular county process, well, it's had a real kind of tortured history. So originally it went to the Planning Commission, and the County Planning Commission said, we'll allow it, but they had several big changes that they wanted the developer, Creative Investments, to make. These would have been very expensive adjustments to the plan. And then on top of that, County Supervisor Bill Horn, who was seen as a surefire yes vote on this, had to recuse himself from the final Board of Supervisors vote allowing or blocking the property because the Fair Political Practices Commission said that he had a conflict of interest and that he owned some property nearby whose value could change whether or not the Lilac Ranch development went ahead. So the developer said, you know what, we're going to take this issue directly to the voters. We're going to make our pitch, and we trust the voters of San Diego County to make a well-informed decision on this. And of course, they believe that well-informed decision is going to be to allow this housing project to go forward.
All right, so let's take a look at a clip from Matt Adams. He's a vice president for the Building Industry Association. He talks about the lack of housing in San Diego.
We have a housing shortage in San Diego County. Homes cost as much as they do now because we don't build enough of them, and we haven't for over 10 years. Sandag says we should be building 1,000 new homes every month just to keep pace with population growth. And we haven't done that in over 10 years. So we have to start making real decisions as to where we want to house our citizens, both our current citizens and future citizens.
So we have a housing crisis in San Diego. That's no secret. So Gene, let me ask you. So what makes this controversial? If they want to build homes, don't we need more homes?
I mean, I think there are many aspects to that. I don't know what I would say in addition.
Yeah, I mean, that really is kind of the argument, and I think no one can argue with the fact that we do have a housing crisis. I mean, Megan, you're going to be talking about this. As a story you wrote, I mean, there is an absolute crisis in terms of affordable housing, and one of the things that Accretive and the other boosters of Lilac Ranch say is, these are houses that could be priced as low as, let's say, $300,000. That's well below kind of the median home price in the county. They say this is affordable housing, a lot of it. The opponents, though, aren't so sure.
Well, and Allison St. John has done a lot of reporting saying that there's really a squeeze on that middle class production of housing, and so it seems like that serves that purpose right there.
Absolutely, and that's certainly what the developer and the other people who do support Lilac Hills Ranch say. They say we need more housing, affordable housing, middle-class housing, and that's what Lilac Hills is going to do.
But then, of course, the argument is that where the middle-class housing should go?
Right.
Well,
exactly.
We're going to have to leave that conversation right here, and we'll go on to our next segment. Over the years, Banking Shaw's San Diego properties racked up more than 60 complaints about conditions so bad that state law says no one should have been allowed to live in them. An investigation of Shaw's properties last year by KPBS and Voice of San Diego found gas leaks, sewage backups, cockroach infestations, and much more. Megan, start with the property on Logan Avenue. What was it like? How bad was it when you first reported on it in 2015?
It was definitely in rough shape. It was an older building that hadn't seen any remodeling probably in the last decade. From when I had seen it, some tenants took me into their units, and the sink underneath the sink had kind of caved in because there was so much water from a leak. This was the kind of place where I had a cameraman with me, and we said, you said that there's cockroach infestations. Can you show us that? And in broad daylight, all they had to do was open a drawer, and there they were. And And I saw pictures, I didn't see with my own eyes, but I saw pictures of the ceiling above a shower sort of having a hole in it, kind of caving in because of a leak from the shower above.
I mean, it sounds atrocious.
It was in rough shape.
Jean.
Out of curiosity, how did you find out about this?
So I had heard from a lot of people in my years reporting in City Heights that they felt like their housing was in bad shape and they weren't getting any help for it. So I actually requested code compliance complaints for all of City Heights over the course of a year and sort of categorized them by landlord, and Ben Keem Shah's name rose to the top. He had the most out of everything that I saw, and as I dug in more deeply, there was definitely a pattern of this across properties, across neighborhoods, but then also a pattern of sort of people complaining and then not really seeing much success from that.
So, Megan, what's the Logan Avenue property like now?
So now it's been remodeled by a group called LWP Group, and they specialize in taking older apartment buildings in parts of town like Bankers Hill and downtown and creating a place where sort of millennial types can live. And so the units are sort of bare bones, but the community, there are things like art installations, soundscapes when you go into the buildings. And so now when you go to the property on Logan Avenue, you know, there's a rack for your skateboard, there's murals, art flyers everywhere, and all of the plumbing has been replaced. The building has been overhauled. A lot of those structural issues have been fixed.
So what's the problem? I mean, it's a happy ending. Let's go on to the next thing, or what?
I mean, it's this really tough spot because that building needed to be improved. That community deserves good housing. But unfortunately, in our housing market being so constricted, if you need something that's under $1,000 a month or under $900 a month, you sort of have to put up with cockroaches. There's just no place in San Diego unless you're subsidized, unless you have like a Section 8 voucher.
Wait a minute. You have to put up with cockroaches?
That's what I'm seeing. I mean, what I hear from tenants is that if you're in a certain price range and you can't get help from the government because you're undocumented or because you are on the really long waiting list for Section 8 and just haven't had your name called yet, or maybe you had an eviction, it's really slim pickings. And so it's kind of like you're just looking for a roof over your head and you deal with the other problems that exist.
But that's illegal, isn't it? You can't have vermin infestation and overflowing toilets and collapsing ceilings, can you?
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, I remember your investigation last year. It was great, and it was heartbreaking because, you know, these conditions were like something out of like 14th century England. You know, you really couldn't imagine that anyone really in 21st century America would have to put up with that. And yet, you know, the stories you've done over the past week, it's also heartbreaking because these folks are basically just being kicked out. Do they have any recourse?
So I wouldn't say that they were kicked out. They were given, the new owners followed the law and gave proper notice. I think they actually gave them more time than required by law to vacate the unit. But yeah, where did they go after that? I heard that some of the tenants went into buildings that were just as dilapidated. One tenant ended up on a couch with his family. Another tenant says that she believes she'll be homeless when her lease ends. And in this case, it's questionable whether they had protections because it really did, you know, the building really needed a full gut job. And how can you keep tenants in that situation while you're doing all that construction? But this is happening at other properties throughout San Diego because there's no housing being built. People are looking at the properties that they have and remodeling them to serve sort of a different clientele. And so there is some protection, but it's questionable. There's an ordinance on the books that people sort of disagree about.
Let's hear from Stephen Russell, director of San Diego Housing Federation, who talked about why this older housing stock, as you said, is disappearing in the city. Here's what Russell had to say.
If there's a healthy pipeline of housing in a community, then there would always be housing that is aging out or filtering down to affordability. Unfortunately, in San Diego, because we've had such constraints on housing production, we don't have that pipeline of continuously aging housing. And so in a market like what we're seeing right now, where vacancy rates are extremely low, there's an opportunity for landlords now to take these properties and fix them up. That's where the role of subsidized affordable housing comes in.
So Megan, right now, if a property owner wants to renovate their apartment, can they kick the tenants out and there's no liability on their part? How does it work?
Well, there's a law on the books called the Tenants' Right to Know Ordinance that says, that sort of lays out certain scenarios where it's okay to evict a tenant. And there's one of those scenarios is the need to go in and make repairs. I spoke to the author of the law, and she said that the law was never intended to, Donna Fry said that the law was never intended to stop somebody from going in and remodeling so that they can command a little bit more rent. But tenants' rights attorneys read that law and they see the word violation, they see necessary repairs in the language, they see that a tenant can be removed when reasonably necessary. So to them, they read that as you don't have just cause to evict a tenant if you just want to go in and put in some shiny granite countertops. They also read it as, okay, maybe you do need to fix a code violation, but can you reasonably keep that tenancy in place during those repairs?
Well, let me ask you guys briefly to weigh in on this. I mean, we know housing's expensive here, rental housing. What's the future hold if it's a problem now? Jean, what are we going to do 5 years from now?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah, it's a multifaceted problem, and it's going to, I think, take a multifaceted solution. I mean, everybody in my story talked about different solutions. So building in Lilac Hills, it wasn't necessarily a solution proposed, but building like that. But also looking at building subsidized housing, adding more Section 8 vouchers.
What about the idea? I hear sometimes people casually mention, like, why aren't we building more vertically, or why aren't we really trying to have like real, skyscrapers kind of? I mean, is that a suggestion that maybe we should be building up instead of, out?
Well, yeah. And one of the things that Stephen Russell told me is that if we're building out, I mean, that's still a problem for these tenants who are displaced because a lot of them don't have cars, a lot of them have their kids in school, and if they're displaced and now have to move 30 minutes away, that's not a great solution. In terms of building up, Greg Strangman, the owner of this property now, was talking about how, there's really a demand for his buildings, which are small, old 1920s era units that don't have parking. And so maybe we need to sort of look back to that and build within the urban center, but just expect to have a little bit less room.
Well, thank you very much. Let's move on. When Immigration and Customs Enforcement couldn't handle the flood of Haitian immigrants coming through the San Ysidro port of entry, thousands had to wait in Tijuana until they could be processed. And up until 2 weeks ago, Haitians were granted special protection in the U.S. against deportation because of the devastating 2010 earthquake in Haiti. But the rules changed 2 weeks ago. Jean, why did these rules change?
So, I mean, the authorities said that the rules changed largely because of improved conditions in Haiti, that they were dealing with this massive influx of Haitians coming in through Latin America. We're talking about thousands, like you said, and tens of thousands more who are currently on the way. And they said, you know what, we can't keep accepting all of these Haitians. Conditions in Haiti have much improved since the 2010 earthquake, which is what was behind the initial decision to open doors to these Haitians. So we are no longer going to accept them under these provisions.
Now we have Hurricane Matthew, and that hasn't exactly changed Haiti for the better, has it?
Right. According to the latest statistics that I have, more than 800 people have lost their lives in Haiti because of this hurricane. Tens of thousands have been displaced from their homes. There's massive flooding. Some of the human rights groups that I spoke with are calling this the worst humanitarian crisis in Haiti since the 2010 earthquake. So it's a big change.
Describe, if you would, Jean, the journey that Haitian immigrants make to make it all the way to Tijuana.
So most of these Haitians had resettled in Brazil after the earthquake. But because of very recent political and economic crises that have been unfolding there, they've had to look for other options. So what they've been doing basically since May is traveling all the way north through Latin America. We're talking about walking for days on end, boats, buses, just a combination of various modes of travel through some of the most dangerous countries in the world right now, for example, El Salvador, Honduras. I've interviewed dozens of these Haitians, and they talk about seeing people die because of the heat exhaustion or just starvation. There's rapes along the way. I mean, a lot of the things that the Central Americans have to deal with on the way north through Mexico, they are also dealing with. So it's a very arduous journey.
Is the expectation when they're deported that they'll go back to Brazil, or are they supposed to go back to Haiti?
That's a good question. So because they're Haitian, it's not as easy for the United States to deport them. Say if they were Mexican, they can't just deport them to Mexico, which is where they're coming from. They're entering through the Mexican border. They have to deport them to Haiti in almost 100% of the circumstances. The standard practice is to get into touch with the Haitian government and get travel documents from the Haitian government. But because of the political chaos over there, it's been really hard to do that. And they were planning to start deporting Haitians again after the elections, which were going to happen this Sunday, Haiti elections. And those were postponed indefinitely because of the hurricane.
Jean, how are the Haitians treated in Tijuana in general?
So they're actually being embraced by the local population. Tijuana has a really long and complicated history with migrants who are on their way to the United States, mostly Southern Mexicans and Central Americans. And it's really interesting when you look at that dynamic because they are treating the Haitians completely differently from the way that they're treating Southern Mexicans and Central Americans. There was a huge homeless encampment of migrants in Tijuana that was seen as an eyesore, and the government, just evacuated it, sent a lot of these migrants into drug rehab centers, including those who weren't using drugs, and a lot of residents expressed gratitude. They were saying, oh, thank goodness, that was really bad for business, having all these people on the streets. But with the Haitians, they're totally embracing them. You see them bringing them truckloads of food. At first, they were bringing them Mexican food like chilaquiles and tacos, but then they realized that the Haitians didn't really like that food, and so they asked them, what do you like? And they started bringing rice and beans, and so they're being very, very friendly.
Is it a difference in demographics? Is it more women and children?
Oh, yeah, actually, it's not that. It's just, what I've been finding is that because the population of Afro-Mexicans in Mexico has always been so low, in fact, the Mexican government didn't count them in their demographic surveys until just last year because the population was so small, like less than 1%. So I think just seeing this completely new, different looking type of person is making people wonder well, why are they here? And so people do research and they realize that they're coming from countries with really bad problems, and so they want to help. But there's men and women and children.
Now, Jean, I understand you spoke to a woman who said it's getting to be a problem. Her name is Margarita Adonagi, who runs a shelter. And let's see what she had to say.
Haitians and Africans are mixing with homeless locals who use drugs, she says.
They're addicts who take advantage of the situation and they say, my Haitian friend, I love you, smoke this, drink this.
She says the shelter has already had to turn away previously well-behaved Haitians and Africans who showed up under the influence. And Adonagi says she's also worried about all the drivers who keep stopping and picking up the migrants, offering them housing and jobs, and taking them away.
Where did it take them? What was the purpose of taking them? They don't know what they're getting into.
So, Jean, this is reaching tough proportions in Tijuana and in parts of the U.S., too. What's your feeling about whether the U.S. might change its let's send it back policy in relationship to this latest natural disaster over there?
The crisis, yeah. So I don't have any official statement from the Department of Homeland Security. They haven't said that they're going to change the policy, but they have said that they're monitoring the situation in Haiti. I don't know whether they're going to change the policy back. I do know that there are immigrant rights groups across the border who are demanding that this be done. And so we just have to see what happens.
Now, lastly, in the brief moments we have, even if there's a stay on deportation, are they granted permanent residency, or it's just a temporary thing?
So the people who do make it across, I mean, in the past, they were being given a notice to appear before immigration court documents. So regardless, they had to go through the immigration courts. And right now, I mean, they're being held in detention centers, and they may or may not be deported. They may end up being released because they can only be in detention centers legally for up to 6 months. If they don't get permission from the Haitian government to send them back, then they have to release them.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And that wraps up another week of stories on the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank Joe Girardi of iNewsSource, Megan Burks of KPBS News, and Jean Guerrero of KPBS News for joining us. A reminder, all of the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Kenny Goldberg. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.